boldly engaging the mindless propaganda of our time, apparently with reason. This is Rage of the Age.
This is Rage of the Age, and we have with us today a board member of the board of directors for the Professional Bondsmen of Texas. He is an attorney of over 30 years' experience, having argued cases before the Supreme Court of Texas and the Texas Court of Criminal Appeals. He's also the author of Goods on Bail. I want to introduce to you today Ken W. Wood. Ken, welcome to the show.
Thank you. It's good. Ken Good.
Ken Good. I'm sorry. You have been involved with the law in general, and particularly the issue on bail. And there's many theories going on in the country of how that should look. Some look a little more crazier than others. Let's just start at the very basis then. What's bail meant to do?
I think bail is meant to ensure that someone will appear for court, and it's supposed to assist the county and the government so that they don't have to keep everybody, detain everyone until their case comes up for trial. So I think the purpose of bond or bail is to ensure people appear for court and to ensure that they don't reoffend while they're on bond. I think in its earliest form, in the colonial period, if someone didn't show up, the bondsman or the person who bailed them out of jail took their place. So, now it's become more financial situation. But in its earliest stages, you stuck your neck out for them so far that if they didn't show up, you took their place.
Right. I can imagine they're a little more stringent on making sure you got to court than they probably are now. So,
well, it seems like the real, the issue that we're facing now is this whole system whole concept of criminal justice reform. Because if you think of, this isn't really bail reform, it's criminal justice reform.
Right.
What should be a crime? What should require you to be in court? And it's the whole question of accountability. If you look at the heart of bail reform, it's that we shouldn't hold people accountable. And that's why you're having this big disparity on what bail looks like on different parts of the country, because some parts of the country still believe accountability is very important and other parts do not.
I think you're right about the paradigms behind what's driving the viewpoints is one side emphasizes accountability. The other side apparently has no concern for accountability. I'm not sure why they even have a mentality of anything of criminal justice. It's like there is no criminality.
Well, if you look at the heart of the issue of bail, in my opinion, it goes to our large urban areas. How do we process large numbers of people through the jail quickly and cost effectively?
Right.
And that's where our across the country, we're having failures. If you look at New York, they tried just simple release. We're going to release you without bond. And that was so bad during the pandemic that they started repealing it. Alaska tried, a risk assessment and other reforms, and it wasn't successful, so they started repealing it. You've got other places that have tried things. You've got Texas that's looked at reform multiple times, and it's in the legislative session now looking at reform. And you see the different camps pushing for to try different types of things. But it really comes down to the problem is in our large urban areas. How do you process people through the jail? If you're looking to create a system that treats everybody the same, then that creates chaos because you just don't have the time. Anything that diverts people away, that's what simple release does. It just diverts them away from the magistration system. Well, then you're trying to allow the magistrate's time for what's left. But simple release just creates chaos as well because it gives people the green light to go commit other crimes, or that's the way they perceive it. And so what we're still grappling with is how do we process large numbers of people through the county jails in our largest population area?
So you're talking about something like a one-size-fits-all approach with how we handle individuals, but as we understand, each case is different.
Yes, but we have the reformers proposing systems that do not require individual magistration, where you actually have to appear before the judge to have bail set. But we've got the courts, which are mandating individual magistration in certain situations. So you've got reformers pushing for changes that are different than what the courts are requiring, and that creates problems. And so the only way that you can get away from individual magistration and create a system that doesn't cause issues with the courts is just to release people. And as we've seen, that creates massive problems. In Harris County, that's what they're doing. And they just won't admit to the problem. They admit crime is increasing, but they just deny that it's bail reform. New York, that was the only change. So they admitted,
Right.
went back and repealed a bunch of the reform.
Right. Well, yeah, I don't know how do you I'm a simple guy, cause and effect. It was like this. The minute you implemented this, this happened. That's probably the cause. I don't. I mean, I don't know how you can tap dance all you want. That obviously led to a rise in spike in crime when you let the criminals just out on the street again. So the whole problem you're saying is they're trying to figure out how to process them through these large urban areas that don't have the facilities or the apparatus to handle the amount of criminals they're dealing with. So one group's approach is just release them.
Well, that is one of the approaches. I think the other thing that our friends on the other side are proposing is a risk assessment tool, which I think if you look at it now, the largest digital companies in the world have come out with a press release saying it was rushed, it wasn't properly tested. And now you see a lot of scientific studies coming out saying they should not be a part of bail reform. And that even New York rejected the use of a statewide risk assessment tool in an election last November. But it doesn't, keep them from continuing to propose to use a risk assessment. And the reason for that is they don't have any alternative. There's nothing else for them to propose other than simple release, and that's been a failure everywhere it's been tried.
So what exactly then is the risk assessment that you're talking about? Because I'm not a lawyer. And of course, unfortunately, my concept of laws are influenced by TV shows. To me, when somebody asks for bail or the prosecutor wants to deny bail, are they not in essence going through a risk assessment with the person of whether they should get it or not and what it's set at?
That's a really good point. And I think that there are many different types of risk assessments that are done. Even bail bondsmen are doing a risk assessment when they're deciding whether they're going to post bail for someone.
Right.
Risk. So I think you're right. Courts do that every day. They're determining whether somebody is a risk that they won't show up for court, or whether they're a risk that they'll reoffend or they'll endanger the person who filed charges on them. What the risk assessment tool is an algorithm, or what it is an algorithm that was developed to determine or give you a score to tell courts. Like I think the purest risk assessment tool is from New Jersey, and I think it makes decisions on whether to release somebody. I think in Texas, they're really proposing that as an additional item, and it will determine your risk to appear, risk of not appearing, and risk to commit further crime. But the problem is it's come under attack for several reasons. Since it's an algorithm, it looks at the history of your demographic group. So it's looking since you look white to me on the screen. So based on, it will look at your demographic group historically, and that's an element of its algorithm to determine whether you have a risk to failure to appear or a risk that you'll commit a new crime.
Okay.
Certain racial groups are in jails in larger percentages. That those racial groups will also, just at a starting point, score higher on the algorithm on the risk of reoffending. So that's where they've come under attack, is having a racial element. The problem that I see is when if they don't give up the risk assessment and they still want to stick with it, but they want to strip out all the algorithm complaints, then we're just left with a checklist. Doesn't just review of a criminal history give you more information? That's probably the best determiner of what your risk is. What's your criminal history?
Right.
Well,
that's my thing. I don't understand the algorithm thing. It almost sounds like a credit score, but in the criminal world of where you rank of whether you have an element of trust to you regarding the court system. What do you include in the algorithms, and what you don't include is going to be a highly political issue.
Yes.
Race being one, but it could be a number of other issues.
Well,
economic status could be another argument, I imagine.
The largest technology companies in the world have come out and they've criticized them because they said, that's not what the algorithm was intended for. It's intended to determine what groups will do. And they're great at determining what groups will do, but they're terrible at determining what an individual.
Right. But I guess that's the problem. So we're not basing. So you get a score by your group, and
Part
it
of,
may or may not reflect on you, and you're stuck with it.
well, and I would say probably the more accurate statement is part of your score is based on your group, and you're stuck
Yes.
with it.
Okay. So technically, then you could have a good score on the individual side, but if you're in the wrong grouping wise in the algorithm, that will still lower your score and affect your bail.
Yes, and I think the criticisms from the studies are on both ends of the spectrum. On your failure to appear risk,
Mhm.
there's not any databases that are tracking that information, and in Texas, there's no even proposal to track it, and so it's always going to undercount your risk of failing to appear. For the people that have a history of it, you're not going to know about it. You're only going to know about it if they tell you about it, and if they have a history of failing to appear, they're not going to tell you about it. And so, unless the court just researches it and knows, then they're not going to. That's going to always underscore your risk of failing to appear. And on the other extreme, for certain racial groups, it's always going to over estimate your risk of reoffending. So the criticism is it's wrong on both ends, and so
Mhm.
so I believe it's trash on both ends of the spectrum.
Yeah, well, it sounds like it. It seems then there's this tension between accountability and having them reappear for their court versus being left in jail just by default without any real scrutiny. But if you use scrutiny, then you're overwhelming the apparatus as it exists now in processing it, which in turn just leaves them sitting in jail anyway.
Well, and I think that's a great point. We've set it like Harris County is a great example. We've set up a system where we're releasing large numbers of misdemeanor defendants on just a PR bond, $100 PR bond. They never even see a magistrate. So not only does nobody see them, no one looks at their criminal history. As long as it's a listed crime, they never see a magistrate. The problem with that is that gives criminals a green light to commit more crime, more crime. And the problem is, since we never see a magistrate, we have no accountability. So we have people who are failing to appear and getting a new bond, failing to appear, getting a new bond, failing to appear. I mean, we're not talking 3 or 4 times. We're talking 5, 6, 10, double digit times. And then they commit new offenses, get a new bond. And we have Crime Stoppers in Houston is compiling a list of over 90 people who've been murdered while on not 1 bond, not 2 bonds, not 3 bonds, not 4 bonds, 5 bonds and up, and continue to commit worse crimes, and they're continuing to be released. And at the same time, all these changes have been made. The jail is at capacity. COVID's committed,
Mhm.
caused a lot of problems. But
Yes.
the dockets of the misdemeanor courts had already doubled before COVID, and so
Right.
it's just creating a system that it's if they don't get a handle on it, it's going to collapse. And they've already been told, the commissioner's court's already been told they need to dismiss between 13,000 and 18,000 felony cases to prevent the criminal justice system in Harris County from collapsing. And the proponent of that said, well, at some point you just got to cut your losses. Well, you're cutting losses for the victim, saying they don't even matter.
Wow. Yeah, a million ways I can go here, but well, first let me this is just in my head. In the age of computers that we have and tracking systems, far better than they've ever been in the history of humanity, I don't understand a simple why we can't have a simple system of you've done this many level crimes, you should be automatic. You shouldn't get no bail. I mean, it should be like you type in the name, here's so and so, this offense, this offense, this offense. Yeah, we're going to be a little more stringent. But if like the other people pop up, okay, fine, $100 bail, go about your way. That I can understand. But
Sure.
when you apply that blanketly with no scrutiny, Ye is it just because of the old-fashioned docket system going through a process with each because 'cause I've been in court, it takes forever to process, like, I mean, I watch all day long as these cases that should have been settled, like, in minutes, take an hour or 2 just doing what they do, and, obviously, I think there could be some reform. It's just a matter of how do we proceed and still maintain the American idea of justice and accountability?
Well, there's a whole bunch there, and I would say I have a couple of thoughts. The question, I think accountability kind of is the heart of the bail issue we have right now, and I think we come from many different perspectives. We have some that think that certain things should not be crimes anymore, and
Hmm.
so you have DAs getting elected who say, "Well, I will not prosecute these issues as crimes anymore," but the county next door is still prosecuting those as crimes, and I think that creates a whole um, credibility problem for the criminal justice system where in one county it's a crime and in the other county it's not, but in both counties it is, but in one
Right.
it's not holding anybody accountable, and that bleeds over to the rest of the system. And I think there might be some political influence on that right now. I think we're looking at if you're from a certain political stance, you cannot do X, or you will be punished politically, or you will come under heavy scrutiny politically. And I think that's not helping the criminal justice system. And if these reformers realize the damage they were doing to their own credibility, then I think that they would start imposing accountability more. But the problem is, we're now at the point where if they were to start, our jails are already full. Where would we put if we started holding people who've been out on who are out on 5 bonds or more currently, and they say, well, we're not going to, if you fail to appear anymore, we're going to keep you in jail. They don't have room for them. They've created utter chaos, and they've given criminals what they've perceived, the career criminals, a green light, and so now they don't have any way of addressing it. The way I've called, criminal justice reform or bail reform is we want to set up a system that doesn't take advantage of the poor, but we also want to make sure that the system we set up isn't one that's taken advantage by the criminals. That's what we have right
Well, exactly. And there's always again that tension of um, the hapless citizen being abused versus the criminal having free reign. Mm, Am I understanding right that there is a certain leniency that district attorneys have in what they prosecute?
They do. They do. I mean, DAs determine. I mean, they have a right to determine what to prosecute, what not to prosecute, and we see it all the time. You see it even at the federal level, where
Mm,
there was referral of certain crimes to the attorney general, and they would issue a report saying they weren't going to prosecute it and then you see others where they're filing charges for lying to Congress, and so we always have that. Discretion, and it's because uh, they have the discretion. They don't want to overwhelm the jail. But now we're seeing that discretion, I believe, being exercised with a political influence. And,
right.
and I think that's where we're risking damage to our criminal justice system credibility in the long term, where whoever's in office is going to decide who gets the discretion of not being prosecuted. That's wrong.
So, is there a set criteria that a prosecutor is supposed to go by in determining whether they prosecute or not, or is it simply on their whim?
Well, I don't want to say it's on their whim. I think they're always subject to political review. But I would say, the examples we're seeing right now are low-level drug crimes,
Right.
especially marijuana crimes. You still have them as crimes in the books, and you still have counties that prosecute them. But you have the DA in Harris County who campaigned on a promise that she would divert them. Uh, but one of the criticisms of the diversion program is they have to attend a class, and I think the criticism is they're not even doing that. It's just
Right.
all just yeah,
They won't show up for court. They're not going to class.
yeah. But the problem is we've set up a system that has so much chaos. If you could give somebody deferred adjudication, which in Texas you're giving them candy to get them to agree to plead guilty, and the only follow through, the only accountability you have is if they violate their probation. We've got several examples in Harris County where people were given deferred adjudication for substantial crimes. They violated the terms of their probation. Nobody filed a motion to hold them accountable and have them put in jail as a result of breaking their promise on their probation, and their probation ended. So we've got chaos going throughout the system.
Well, and then my fear, and you've hinted to this, is this is like being taken to another level. I won't prosecute it because, I want a political angle in this. I want my people to prevail and I'm not going to go after them. But, if someone on the opposite opinion does something and it could be however minute, well, I'm going to go after them and I'm going to railroad them with the rule of law and take them down. And we kind of see this now, and people aren't stupid. They see it's being applied unevenly. We've reached a dangerous playing field to where there's no law, there's no even application, and it's just straight up politics. And whoever can gain the power to hack the other is going to do it. That's going to create an atmosphere that's not very pleasant in the long run.
Well, I don't disagree with what you've said. I would soften it a little bit and say if our elected officials are not careful, that perception is already growing among the public. And whether that perception is true or not, that is what certain elements of our citizenship, our fellow voters, our fellow citizens, that's what they believe. And, you can see that you don't even have to compare what's going on at the state level with the federal level. You can just compare the last two presidential elections.
Right.
There were riots. There were skirmishes after Trump was elected and around his inauguration, and people were charged, and they were ultimately had their charges dismissed. And then you have issues around Biden's inauguration, and those people are being, they're being arrested around the country, and then if the local judges release them, I've heard of situations where a judge in D.C. is revoking their release and ordering them to be transferred to D.C. and trying to throw the book out. Some people would say on the right, they're just holding them accountable. They just didn't hold the last group accountable. Well, that unevenness, that disparity, that one treatment of one side and another treatment of another, whether it's right or wrong, or whether it's correct or not, that is growing. And so you're going to see more and more unhappiness as a result of that. And that you can put on the foot of our criminal justice system. And it's their job to have credibility. And if they're destroying credibility with this disparity, then that will hurt the entire country.
You're listening to Rage of the Age. Rage of the Age. Politics, religion, economics, and history with a conservative bend.
How can we get that image back? I don't think that's a recent thing. I believe for years, maybe decades, there's just been this growing belief amongst a good number of the citizens of this country that the justice system don't care about justice. It's if you have the money, if you have the influence, or if you have the right person in that position to do what you want, that's what you're going to get. Everyone else be damned. How do we gain that back?
We're in a terrible time right now. I remember a time when our elected officials, if they spoke about a criminal case while it was in trial, that caused a great problem in the court system. I remember movies about, Nixon saying so-and-so was guilty. And so they were trying to, they had to question the jurors that were sitting on the jury about, what the president said about this person's guilt and whether that was going to affect them. Now you've got situations where you've got police officers on trial, and every elected official in the state is saying that he's guilty before the jury has addressed whether he's guilty. So you've got the opposite paradigm. You've got this mob mentality. And I really think, and I could be wrong, but I think a big influence on this is we've learned how to manipulate through organization at the county level, and we've learned the importance of if we get people angry, they show up to vote. And so this growing sense that we have 6 months before every election, major election, about getting the other group angry so they'll go out and vote in larger numbers seems to me now bleeding over to the rest of the time as well. And my argument is, when you create a mob, you can't control it. And that mob, once you point it to somebody, you better be careful because you lose control. And you see that happening now. You see the mob getting a little bit out of control and going after their own across the country. And what we see, that's part of the chaos that's being created. We're just pointing a mob at somebody and we're just pulling the trigger and letting go. And then hell breaks loose. Yeah. And we can't control it. And so we need to get back to a system where, we may not like the result, but we argue for it. Trump did a disservice to the country when he didn't show up for the inauguration, because then he's not giving credibility. I understand why he didn't. Understand why he didn't believe the result was credible. And that's part of the problem. We have a system set up where everyone is trying to get help. I mean, you could make an argument. I don't know whether it's true. You could make an argument that the Democrats decided they couldn't win fairly, so they decided to, around the edges, make it easier to people vote, whether it was a proper vote or a not proper vote, and that swung the election. If you think that the election was decided by these, 4 or 5 different counties by 70,000 votes, and that was the difference between Trump getting elected or not, you can see where Trump would be coming from. But the problem is they're doing that, and him reacting to it, which he's always going to react to that because that's why people support him. He doesn't just take it. But that also undermines the credibility of the entire system. So when you undermine the credibility of the system, which is another way of saying it, then that undermines the system. And you do that enough, then we're going to have people fighting on the streets, which we already see. And we just have one extreme of the political spectrum saying it's okay, and the other side saying it's not. And then when the other side does it to the far side, then all of a sudden it's not okay anymore.
Right.
And that's where we have big problems. And so we got to so how does that impact our criminal justice system? It creates chaos. And that whole concept of just releasing people brings further chaos. And so we have to go back to the things that have worked in our criminal justice system. We know individual magistration works, and we know that's constitutional, but the problem is the manpower. And so what's worked in the past to get people through the jail cost effectively and efficiently, it's been through the use of a bail schedule, which allows the people who can afford to get out to post their bond, and then the courts can focus what limited time they have left on the people who are left in jail who can't post a bond. The problem with that is people argue that's not fair, but we're not talking about fairness. We're talking about how do we get people through the jail quickly and efficiently, and some system that's not chaotic, and that's what's being lost in the debate.
I remember one time, I don't say one time, it used to be a perception, and I was even taught this in school, that like newspapers and news agencies could not come out and say someone was guilty. They had to say allegedly. They allegedly did this, and they always were supposed to present it in the manner of, this is what they're accused of, but the jury's still out. We have no verdict, so we can't say they're guilty. I had always been taught that, even in school, to where, like you're saying now, it's just open season. I don't like you, you're guilty. I hate what you stand for, you're guilty. It doesn't matter. We've become the jury ahead of time, and then people get angry when the jury might decide differently, but they're looking at the actual evidence, the presentation of the case. They're listening to the judge instruct them on what to take in accordance to the law. That's how it should be processed. But like you said, it's just totally the courts decided before the court. Can we not have rules to zip people's lip and with some teeth in it to make that be fixed?
The problem with that is First Amendment. Always have a First Amendment right to say what they want. And so, courts are very reticent about putting limitations on your ability to speak your mind. That's one of the beauties of our country. I think we have other issues, though. We have this history of, making people angry gets them out to vote. Yeah. And we have a lot to be angry about, especially in our inner cities. We've got schools have failed. They haven't been able to reach large portions of their students. We have high dropout rates. We have families have failed. Fathers do not stick with families in the inner cities. Business opportunity or opportunity for work has failed in the inner cities. And we've seen that even become worse with the riots that we've had in the last 2 years, because that's closed down many businesses. So they have fewer opportunities. And so now we're saying, well, we failed all those areas. And so, now we need to step in and just say that these crimes are not crimes anymore, or we're not going to prosecute you. So you see like California that says, well, if you steal something under $750 or $900, whatever, it's an arbitrary amount, and it's for a need, well, then that's not a crime anymore. And so you see like Walmarts and other retail stores in California, everything's behind a lock, and they have employees because of the minimum wage hikes. And so you have to stand in line and wait for the limited number of employees to come over so they can unlock something so that you can buy it, because if someone just steals it, it's no longer a crime in that area.
Isn't there in the law, though, provisions for, like, we have freedom of speech that you were mentioning, which I absolutely endorse. I'm so not against freedom of speech. But Is there not things, understandings in the law that you don't necessarily have that freedom to slander and libel people? Can't you have suits for that?
You can't. You're right, but you can have libel and slander suits, but you can't usually sue somebody for their opinion. So if
Mhm.
somebody says it's my opinion that they're guilty,
Right.
then that's not a statement of fact. The best example of libel and slander is, to me, accusing you of raping somebody. That's either
Right.
true or it's not true. And if I said you raped this woman 2 days ago, then if you didn't do it, then I've slandered you. And since I've accused you of a crime, it's slander per se. Um, but the truth is always a defense. But when we're talking about opinion, which is
Right.
some cases that we have going on right now where somebody's facing, where they're just doing jury selection, and the city enters into a humongous settlement and tells everybody, "Oh, we're not trying to influence the jury," and the jury's all saying, "Well, we heard it." I mean, the opposite is, how do we give somebody a fair trial when everybody says they're guilty?
Well, I know, and that's my thing, because the other constitutional issue at stake is the presumed innocence before being proven guilty. And if you have everyone, okay, they cloak it as it's my opinion that, but then every news agency is going to echo it, because when people are killing and hating each other, they prosper too, right? So when they present this out there and the juries hear this, they've potentially clouded judgment of a person's innocence, which is also protected under the Constitution. So how do we walk that middle ground?
I think the example here is the exact same example we see in bail reform. I mean, we're creating chaos in
Mhm.
trials. We're creating chaos in jury selection. We don't have anyone standing up for the system as much. We don't say, all these elected officials need to be saying, we need to have faith in the system. We need
Mhm.
to let the system work. We need to let the
Mhm.
jury decide this person's guilt, and we trust the jury. Nobody's doing that right now. No.
Right.
In fact, you have jurors who are being selected saying, I don't know whether I'll be safe if the verdict's not what's expected. I don't know if my family will be safe if the
Well,
verdict
exactly.
is expected. And so that bleeds from jury selection all the way down to setting bail. I mean, chaos ensues everywhere, because if you're making decisions out of chaos, you're not making decisions on, is this person going to appear? What's their criminal record? I mean, look at the person who's being a police officer who's on arrest. What are their risk of not showing up? Very low. What's their risk of failing to offend again while they're under a trial? If it's their first time they've ever been elected, why does that person have a $1 million bond?
Right.
Because of the politics going around. And then you have just setting bail for people who have been arrested 5 or 6 times. They have 2 or 3 convictions in the last 3 years. And you're just, because of the chaos and because of the fear that you're going to get criticized, you're just going to release them, even though the reviewing of their criminal records would say, this guy's a risk. And in Harris County right now, Houston, the Crime Stoppers has documented over 90 people who've been murdered while their killer was on multiple PR bonds.
Yeah, that's insane. Uh, I mean, I'm thinking ahead. If this continues at the rate it's going, and we don't come to a normalized system that people can let do its job, like you're saying, and it's totally politicized, shamelessly at times, the other side's not going to sit there and take it. They're going to react in a more high-handed fashion to meet what's taking place, and it's going to be it'll be like an arms race, but differently in a political form, which could spill out into bloodshed on our streets. Because if I can't get justice in the court, if innocent people can't be set free because you just don't like them, and the court's just a political weapon, no one's going to trust it unless it's on their side. What's the recourse? I'm going to resort to some other way to deal with the issue, since I can't use what should be impartial.
We've had periods of what would I call it? Periods where we have recalibrated in the past. The 60s was a period of
Yeah.
recalibration, of reevaluating our criminal justice system. So our hope is that this is a reevaluation period. Uh,
Yes.
where, like in New York, they tried it They found that it didn't work, and they started repealing. Alaska, they tried it, didn't work, they repealed it. The risk that we have is we have some areas where they won't admit that it's not working. Like in Houston right now, they'll say crime is increasing, but it's not our fault.
Right.
We can't have, as long as we cannot have a truthful discussion of the results, as long as we can't evaluate what's working and what doesn't work from just a step above where we all agree or disagree, then we're not gonna get anywhere on those areas, because it's not an even-handed fight. It's all from politics, and
Exactly.
I see that in certain areas. You can see that where they're having outbreaks, where they're having areas where the police can't even go into. It's because it's been overly politicized, and we're giving in to the mob, and we don't know what to do about it. They've unleashed it, and now they can't control it. And you can see that. I mean, you can see that clearly now. And the question is, like that you raised, where do we go? And the question is, are we going through a period of reset, and we're going to reset, and we're all going to come together for another period of time? Or is it just going to continue to spin out of control with further chaos? I'm hoping that history shows us that we will have a reset, and that our public will not, our voters, our communities will not stand for allowing chaos to continue. I would argue that the chaos that we've had so far is really one of the things that brought us Trump as our president. If you look at the second Bush as president, he ended his term at a 30% favorability. And a lot of people would argue that was because he didn't stand up for himself.
Right.
He just sat and took it. In fact, he was quoted to say, "I will let history judge whether I was a good president." And I think history will treat him favorably, but he was beat around like a piñata by his political opponents, and he just sat and took it. For good or bad, what you want to say, good about Trump, bad about Trump, he will not sit and take it.
Right.
So the people that like him, the people that voted for him, and I think one of the reasons why we got him is as president is because he did what so many other people want. They want to fight back. And he is a symbol of a growing chaos, where if y'all are not going to agree that it's not working, then we're going to keep pushing, and that will maybe end in further chaos. It may end in conflict. I would say we've got examples of conflict. I hope not. But if the people on one side are not willing to have a sterile conversation about what works and what doesn't, and look for common areas, and it's just, we don't care, we're going to do it anyway, I think that's going to lead to conflict. I mean, we've never had that in our past. We've always looked for common ground, and I don't see that right now. You can see that with the attempt to end the filibuster. We just want to push one side through. And my fear is, you can see it right now. Every presidential election, the first year is redoing all the things the last president did, instead of trying to build off the common ground. It's all undoing. So the first year of Trump was to undo what Obama did, and you see Biden now trying to undo everything Trump did. Is that the first year of every election now for the president? I mean,
yes, it will be.
Every time there's a change of party right now.
Right. Well, yeah, I mean, I look at the border crisis right now, and the whole thing you were saying of, well, it's not our fault. I mean, they're still blaming Trump like he did it, and he's not even here to blame. It's insane. It's like, it's obviously a problem right now. And again, I'm cause and effect guy. That didn't happen until all of a sudden you came in with your signaling of, I'm going to open up the borders, and you sure did. And now we have this crisis, but now there's the refusal to admit that, maybe this is a problem. They won't even call it a crisis. It's ridiculous. And I look at police officers, like you're saying, is another part of the element of this is they can't do their job. And in places there are politicians refusing to let them do their job because of how it might be perceived or looked. And then crime goes up, and they still want to act like someone else did it. To me, it's obvious cause and effect. You remove the police force, which is supposed to basically curb the violence from the criminality out there, and you won't even let them do that. We are failing on a major scale here.
I agree. I think that's a very good example, and you can see it goes all the way down to setting bail. Because if everything is political, and we're trying to decide what crimes to prosecute, and we're making a list of crimes that we're no longer going to prosecute, then it comes just down to accountability. if we're not going to hold people accountable for the crimes they've committed, and you can see this, are we just going to decriminalize all drug charges? There's that argument.
Yeah, there is.
But the problem is, if you can't win the drug war, you lose everything else, because so many crimes are built on drug addiction, because they're robbing, they're stealing to pay for their drug addiction, or so many other crimes are based on them having drug problems. And so if you're going to give up on that, then you're essentially giving up on crime. I read a really good book about recently that had made the statement: if you can't win the drug war, you don't win any war on crime.
Well, because you're not, because basically it's like this: we don't know how to fight this crime, so we just won't make it a crime no more. Well, that's going to be applied to pretty much anything that becomes a problem. So if I'm a criminal and they organize, it's obvious, right? If we can just make this a problem that they don't want to fight no more, it will suddenly be legal. What's the point of even having court anymore?
Well, see, I think we've all been touched by drugs in our families. I have a sister who had a prescription drug problem for 20 years after having a car accident where she had substantial injuries on her face. And the poor man's drug rehab is jail, whether we want to admit it or not. The poor family, that's the only way they can get their families, their people straightened out. If you think about it from the pretrial standpoint, we're making it where they can't be kept in jail, because we can't keep somebody in jail who says, I'm poor. We can't set a bond. Their argument is we can't set a bond that they can't afford, even if they fail to appear, even if they have other crimes, which is just ludicrous under the case law. But it's all about ending accountability. And if we do that, we're taking away the poor person's drug rehab. And so I would argue we're giving up on that segment of our society.
Yeah.
In a concept of fairness. We're saying, well, everybody deserves a second chance. Our country was built on second chances. We're way past second chances. We're on 5th, 6th, 7th, 10th chances. And we're still saying the result's not different. That's where we're having a problem with chaos and a lack of accountability.
I want to touch one more thing before we go. In light of everything we've talked about, is there not judicial opinion from the courts on how to proceed with it? Cannot the courts step in and say, that's not how it works? It doesn't matter what your politics are. It doesn't matter if that's the screaming match you want to start and that's the campaign you're running on, that this is the law. And the law has to, that's my job, is to tell you what the law says. This is the law. This needs to cease. Is that just not happening? Is it just activist judges again? What's going on with that sector?
Well, I think the question you're asking about the courts of appeals is a very good one, and it's also the public don't understand. But a court of appeals, the Supreme Court, have limited roles. The trial court tries the case. There's a record. There's all the documents that are filed, and then when you go to the court of appeals, you're pointing out to the court, hey, look at this point in the record, or look at this ruling the trial court made and it was wrong, or abuse of discretion. So the court of appeals has a very limited review. They can't just come in and say, okay, trial court, so you're doing it wrong. Now, in Texas, the Court of Criminal Appeals has a little bit more discretion to step into a trial court case and say, we want to review that on a criminal case. But by and large, it's really a limited review. But here in the area of bail reform, I think the reformers have actually helped us here, because they picked cases across or jurisdictions across the country 5 years ago and started filing cases because they wanted bail to be held unconstitutional from the Supreme Court, thinking that would happen. And we now have had two opinions from the Fifth Circuit that have, I guess 3 opinions from the Fifth Circuit, one from the 10th or 11th that said bail is constitutional. And, where they identified problems with the bail process, where poor people didn't have an opportunity to ask for deduction of the bond amount. They've set out procedures. And the most recent case says if you follow those procedures, then the review goes all the way down at the appellate court level to a rational basis, which is the review level that counties always win. And so like in Texas, we've proposed in the last 2 sessions, we codify the process that's been set out by the Fifth Circuit. It doesn't cost a lot of money. It builds off the current system. So you don't have this big investment And so like Harris County just, no, we're not going to do that. We're going to do something completely different. And they've invested $100 million in doing something that's created more chaos because they're just releasing people. And so now they're saying, well, it's going to cost us $100 million if we try to implement the Fifth Circuit. Like, I'm sorry, we should all be looking to follow the law. The Fifth Circuit's given Texas a roadmap. The question is whether Texas will follow it. And there's some bills pending at the legislature right now to do that.
Ken, this is a very fascinating topic to me. We could probably go in a million different directions. So many things are tied to it. It's been really awesome having your insight in this, and thank you for being a guest today.
Oh, well, thank you for having me. I always like to talk about reform, and I don't have any problem talking to any side on this issue. So we have had to become experts on this issue. We didn't want to, but we've had to become experts because we know what's worked. The bail bonding industry has been in place for over 200 years. There's a reason. We do a good job.
You're listening to Rage of the Age. Rage of the Age. Politics, religion, economics, and history with a conservative bend.
Welcome to the essay segment, and today I want to talk about piracy, leftist tactics, and the taking away of accountability. And what does this all have to do with anything? Well, as many of you are probably aware, if you remember listening to other episodes, I do have a fondness for history. I really enjoy history. I'm an avid history fan. I'm considered an amateur historian simply because I'm not paid for it, but it's not because I don't dive into it and wrestle with it and look at it, study it, and watch it and read it and breathe it. I really enjoy it. I mean, maybe it's a field I could have entered in younger, but I'm kind of glad I didn't because, the way they do history now is not history. It's just straight up political activism. They don't look at the text. They don't look at the history. They're trying to find oppression behind every leaf in every corner, not looking at the context of what's going on. Yeah, I would so not enjoy being a historian nowadays, being a professional one, that is. But we were talking about accountability during this episode with Ken Good. Wonderful interview with him. A topic that another one of the many things going on in this country that the lamestream media just will not cover, will not address these issues. They take these pot shots at, they alt-right this, and they're trying to oppress these people, and it's just this crazy. It's like hit play and do it again. Apparently, there's no intellectual requirement to report our news anymore. You don't have to ask hard questions. You just have to repeat the political paradigms over and over again. You don't even have to church it up anymore. You can just keep reusing the same word, the same talking point. You can have absolutely no intelligence whatsoever and handle the media. It's really a scary thing to think about. But this whole idea of taking away accountability is a frightening thing. But, it's not a new idea. Again, when I see things going on in the world now, and especially in my own country that I love dearly, and I see things happening, what happens in my head is all these historical examples just start shooting through my head. And I start seeing these comparisons, and I'm like, wow, that's dangerously similar. We've seen this before. I wonder how that plays out. Yeah, and sometimes it's not a good result the first time, but it's like, who cares? Let's try it again. What could go wrong, right? Let's take away accountability. Now, and I've complained about this a few episodes, conservatives have gotten into a really bad streak where we look at these things and go, well, liberals are just stupid, but they're not stupid. They have strategies. They know what they're trying to accomplish. They're using high-handed, underhanded methods. They're using things that are absolutely deplorable. Notice a twist of word there. In order to accomplish a goal. But they're not stupid. They're trying to actually accomplish something, and we're not seeing the forest for the trees. We think they're just lost their mind. Now, I might concur that their thinking might be off base. Yes, I might agree with you there. But if you think they're just mindless in what they're trying to accomplish, you're dead wrong. And you need to pay attention. We might look at this whole thing of they don't want to hold criminals accountable. Well, they're just dumb. Well, if it was just the issue of crime, then yes, I think you've lost your mind. But you have to look at it through the bigger picture. What are they trying to accomplish by not holding criminals accountable? Well, there's a number of reasons. There's a number of things. The truth is, there is political power when you allow certain people not to be held accountable for what they do. There's political power in that. And that's what they're trying to seize upon. I got two basic illustrations I want to share with you. One involves piracy. Now, generally, when you think about piracy, it's one of those things where it's kind of a mutual consent that that's a bad thing, right? If somebody's out raiding other people's ship and taking their stuff and raiding and plundering and killing and sinking ships and, and all that sort of thing, everything that we picture of in piracy. And by the way, I'm not talking Pirates of the Caribbean where they introduce this weird dark element of the supernatural or something. Where did that come from? But I mean, actual piracy, they're not looking for enchanted things. They're looking for actual treasures. They're looking for things to steal and take. You look at piracy and generally around the world, in all cultures, it's considered something bad. It's something that you don't want lurking in your waters. It's something that you would punish by the force of law. It's something that you would want the law to hold them accountable for, because piracy is just considered bad. Now, back in the day, it was a common thing, especially in the age of sail, where it was before a time where, standing navies were kind of a new thing. They were still being built. They didn't have the projection power that maybe they would have later on. A lot of times government was just hire civilian ships, give them a commission to do things, and that's how they could form quick navies. Of course, they weren't very efficient. But even when established navies came onto the scene, it was still a practice to issue what is called a letter of marque, and you would give it to a private owner of a ship. And the idea is that private owner would use their ship and they would arm it as a warship, and then they would use that ship of theirs in order to attack enemy shipping. And because the government gave them this letter of marque, it absolved them from the crime of piracy. So they were no longer considered a pirate. Why? Because the government now sanctioned what they're doing. Now, see, in this case, it's a big example of me refusing to hold someone accountable is now giving me political power. Normally, that would be considered an act of piracy. But now I'm unleashing that against my enemy. Therefore, I accept it. It's fine, right? So they would issue these letters of marque, and the expectation was, look, you would grab your loot. Sometimes you have stipulations of you'd have certain designated areas of courts in port cities where you would bring in your loot, you adjudicate the case, and you'd give your cut basically to the one who issued you the letter. Right? So whatever nation hired your ship, you would give them a cut of your proceeds basically, and you'd keep the rest. And then that, it'd be very lucrative business if you were successful, snatching all this stuff. But here's the thing. Eventually the wars end. And at that time, those privateers no longer have the protection of the removal of the accountability. And if they continue in those actions, they are now pirates again. Now, one of the greatest examples that we see this happen is with a man named Edward Teach, otherwise known as Blackbeard. See, he was once on a privateering ship, in a privateering fleet, actually, working in the Bahamas during Queen Anne's War, and he's fighting, with the permission of the British government in this area, and so they commit these acts of piracy, which is okay. But then the war ends, but they don't quit what they're doing. They continue doing what, they have been not held accountable for so long. They have nothing else they're going to go to. It's what they're familiar with. They're making good money doing it. They're not walking away from it. Well, now they're pirates. Now, their activity is not different. It's only a matter of whether it was sanctioned or not at the time for the political use of which it was employed. At 1 minute, this man that we now know as Blackbeard, he was a legal privateer covered by the government to conduct these acts. The minute he's not needed and he's continuing the same thing, and now he's considered a pirate. Now the accountability is put back on again. Now that's, maybe you think that's just a crazy example of, accountability and, of course the government would use whatever it means it could to prosecute the war. And yes, you're right. But it's in certain circumstances we remove accountability because we want a result. I'm trying to make that point here. When somebody removes accountability from something that otherwise is considered heinous, it's because they want to gain some kind of goal by it. They are using it as a weapon in which to either intimidate or coerce or put leverage or pressure against an opponent in order to force your will. So when you see somebody wanting to remove accountability from something, it's not because they randomly decide, I don't like the idea of accountability. No, there's an end game. What do they want to accomplish by removing that accountability? That is the question you have to ask. Now, I think the left understands this pretty well. When I look again at the history of revolutionary movements of the left, and by this I add in the Nazis. So I'm not giving you a pass there. You call them alt-right, but there's so much socialism tied to it. The only thing that made them alt-right in your head is their use of the military and their imperialism, which, by the way, Joseph Stalin had similar ideas, but you want to not associate him with the right. I don't know. Y'all are confusing to me sometimes, but there's the same tactic that they all use. You take away accountability for certain actions, right? The left was very good at getting criminals to do their works of provocation and agitation and to stir up trouble, and it was on purpose. The goal is this. You want it to be seen that your government can't protect you. They want it to be seen that the government really doesn't have any power. We have the power. And if you end up on the wrong side when we seize power, well, you already seen that we're the ones who decide what happens to people. So you might want to consider that when you start defending one side or the other and who you end up on, right? It's this whole thing where the smug statement, I'm on the right side of history. What they're saying by that is we'll win by any means, and if you were an opponent, we're going to make you pay. That's what that smug statement really means. It's not like you're not a prophet. You can't foresee things. You're not even a good futurist, right? Because you don't even know history, much less the future. But the whole idea is just to intimidate. If you end up on the wrong side, it's going to cost you bad. Now, here's the irony. When you look at many of these movements, these left-wing movements, and yes, I'm going to throw in the Nazis again. When you see that they have released the accountability, people not going to jail or not serving full time, giving special leniency in certain cases for their actions, it adds up. It sets a tone, and it creates a political weapon. But let me call you, for you street thugs who are professionals right now, that you love what you're doing, mark your time. All right, it's the same thing with the piracy and the letter of a mark. That time's going to expire. See, with all those regimes that took power in that manner, one of the first things they did is they went after the revolutionaries and took care of them. Why? Because you're like the pirate that basically had become unemployed, and they don't want you around no more. They're going to hold you accountable again because now you're not useful to their political end. Your time is short. So all these people I see in the streets that, like Antifa and all these others, some elements of BLM out there purposely agitating and creating trouble. You get a sense of power. You get a rush from it. You think you're on the right side of history. But I'm telling you, if the people you think you want to win, you're going to be one of the first people that are going to get your letter of marque revoked, and they're going to take you down because you're trouble. They know your trouble. That's why they used you in the first place. But there's a time limit on how long they will hold you accountable when you start to affect them. See, you're cute now because you affect their enemy. That day's going to end. That's how history always rolls. But now I look at today, and it's the same application here. When someone wants to take accountability, actual accountability from the law against people, you have to ask the question, what is their goal? That means they are allowing it on purpose because they want to hurt somebody with it.
You've been listening to Rage of the Age. If you loved today's podcast, make sure to leave a review on the media you're listening through. Secure future episodes by heading over to rageoftheage.com and clicking the RSS feed button. Until next time, this has been Rage of the Age.